The Oxy Acetylene Torch is very useful in the automotive classroom. It can be used for cutting metal or for loosening up seized and corroded fasteners. It uses tanks of pressurized oxygen at extreme high pressure and a tank of low pressure acetylene. The regulators are used to control the flow to the torch head itself. The torch head has valves to control the flow of oxygen and acetylene. This is a cutting torch head, so there's an additional valve for the oxygen flow and the jet for the oxygen. As well, we have special heating tips or tip for brazing. Those don't have the additional handle on them. When you're setting up the torch, the regulators should be backed off when you approach it. This may not be the case in industry, but in our classroom they will always be backed off. When you open the oxygen tank, you're going to open the valve and keep turning it until it seats again. There's two seats for it there. As I said, the oxygen is under extremely high pressure, and that prevents oxygen from leaking out past the valve itself when it's open. On the acetylene side though, you only want to open it one turn. So if there's a fire at the head of the torch, you can quickly reach over and shut that off. It's not under the same high pressure. As we start the oxygen flow, we can adjust the regulator up to bring the number up. I'm going to start with it at about 20. And then I'm going to do the same for the acetylene, except I'm only going to go up to about 5 with the acetylene. At 15 psi, acetylene changes from a gas state to a liquid state. And at that point, it is incredibly volatile. And compression on the hose, even as simple as stepping on it, could cause a fire. So we're at most going to use between 5 and 7 psi of acetylene. And the regulators are going to allow you to set your flame to make sure that you get a nice, hot, neutral flame instead of a carbonizing or oxidizing flame. And I'll explain those as we proceed. So now that I've got a rough setup on my torches, I'm ready to light them. To light them, I'm going to need a striker. We don't ever want to use a fueled lighter to light them because you're introducing a fuel source right near a flame source, which does not seem like it's a very safe idea. And I'm going to need to switch out my glasses to these torch glasses. Not sunglasses, because sunglasses are not rated for impact and typically not dark enough. We want to be using a shade 5 torch glass. All right, so now that my regular has a rough set, I'm going to open the valve for the acetylene. And light it. Now you can see we've got a plume of smoke and we've got the flame there. As I increase the pressure, it burns cleaner and cleaner. But you can see it's popped off the tip of the torch. We want that pressure set when it's as clean as possible, but still right on the tip of the torch. And it looks like that is just over 5 psi. Now I'm ready to open the oxygen. I can tell from the sound of that my oxygen flow is too high. So this big white feather in the middle of the flame, that's indicating to me that currently the mixture is rich. There's too much fuel, not enough oxygen. So I'm going to increase the oxygen flow. That feather has disappeared, and I've got nice bright tips of flame, and they're kind of rounded at the end. That is a perfect neutral cutting flame. If I have too much oxygen, I get an oxidizing flame. And you can hear the sound of the flame has changed. As well, now instead of nice rounded tips, those jets of flame have sharp tips and they're not as bright anymore. So I'm going to return to my balance. And that is at about 10 psi oxygen. Now that's not going to be adequate for cutting. That's great to set up for heating. For cutting, you need extra oxygen, and then you use this valve to actually regulate your flame. So now I've got my nice neutral flame, and when I hit the jet, if I was heating steel, when it's at the appropriate temperature, you hit the jet, and it doesn't melt the steel and blow it out of the way so much as it rapidly oxidizes or rusts it away in place. When you're finished using the torch to heat, you want to be sure to shut it off in the correct order. And that is fuel first and then oxygen. Because if you shut off the oxygen first, the flame will actually burn down into the head of the torch. You'll get a loud pop. Sometimes people seem to like that, but you now have a flame in a contained area. That's the recipe for disaster. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to back off my flow of acetylene, and it burned all of the acetylene out of the torch tip. And now I do the same with my oxygen. Back it down to 0. Close all the valves on the torch head itself. And wrap up the hose to ensure there's no tripping hazard. And be careful because the torch head itself will be hot. So you want to be sure to put it somewhere where it's not going to be touched. When using the torches, you always must get permission of your instructor. You need to have someone ready with a fire extinguisher in case there's a fire that breaks out. And as well, you need to be aware of where your flame source is pointing. You may be heating up a component on the other side of the vehicle, and it may be directing the heat or the flame into the floor of the vehicle, where it might light the carpet on fire, damage electronics inside the vehicle, or cause other damage to other components adjacent to it. There are many rubber components. Many vehicles may have oil or other contaminants on the underside. So we need to be aware of any hazards in the area whenever using this tool. It's very useful, but it's one of the more dangerous